He did something back there, and those programs ceased to exist within the system. But to hear Representative Love speak concerning, passing legislation to get those things going with the monies, recurring monies coming in to do that, that's awesome. That's wonderful because, it's a lot of guys in there, Dr. Haney, that will avail themselves to that, because it's a wonderful thing. And they're looking for stuff like that because there's not a whole lot of rehabilitation that goes on in the prison system that's provided by the state. So to have something like this in place, that's awesome. But before we get too far in the show, I need to say this concerning Representative Love. I met him back during the flood, when the flood took place. 2010, when the flood hit Nashville. I was attached at that time to another church, pastoring one of their locations. And when the flood hit, we didn't do anything. And Pastor Love, man, they was on the ground out there, man. I was coming all the way from Antioch to Bordeaux, bringing stuff down there, and they was on the ground, man. He was out there actively, man, involved, engaged in that community. And I've been impressed, with him ever since. And now that he stepped out and pretty much followed in his father's footsteps and got into the legislature, and now not only is there, but actually doing something, because he's the kind of guy that's put the boots on the ground and make things happen, and to hear about the legislation that he's passing, and then some of the other things that I'm sure he'll talk about as well. I'm just impressed, and just to say publicly here, that this if anybody in the state legislature deserve our vote, he's the guy that deserves it, and we need to support him 100% because he's supporting us 100%.
I think Representative Love, since we're talking about serving and that we're in the political season now and et cetera, what would you say to a large number of people? I think we're in a situation where in some of our local areas we have only 7, 8, 10% of the people participating in the suffrage. What would you say to young people what would you say to people this morning about the importance of participating in politics and what it really means from your perspective being in the state legislature?
Okay, let me say to Pastor Walker, thank you for those kind words. Much of what I do is because my father made it very clear for me to understand that I had no choice but to be engaged in the process because the process shapes everything in our life. And I tell folks very clearly, you're not born in this country until there's a birth certificate signed which says you were indeed born at a certain time at a certain place. I mean, in theory, you have to use a birth certificate to get any other documentation going forward. And you're not dead until you get a death certificate. Let you die and your family try to access your bank account or insurance and there's no death certificate. They can't do it, right? So in that vein, you must be involved in the process, which means our kids must involve themselves in voting. They must look at candidates and look at what the candidates offer, what promises they make. And then if you're not satisfied with the particular candidate, you have the opportunity to vote them out. That's the process we have. Process of evaluating persons and seeing, okay, have you kept your campaign promises? Like Pastor Walker said, I was engaged in the process of helping our community before running for office. I didn't do it because I wanted to run. I did it because I was raised that way. Told oftentimes by my father, apple trees don't produce apples because they want to prove they're an apple tree. They produce apples because they are an apple tree. And so service was coming out of me in the flood, and then chance came to run for office, and I did. And if you look at the bills that I've passed this particular session, to get a bill passed which will now allow the state of Tennessee to form a maternal mortality review board to reduce pregnancy-related deaths, to pass a bill taking the felony portion off of a possession of a ½ ounce or less of marijuana to save the state $1.7 million in incarceration fees for small amounts of marijuana when we are causing college students to lose their scholarships because of this. So those are my ways of passing good bills and simply asking people, if you're satisfied with the work I've done, vote me back in. If you're not, vote me back out. And that's the will of the people. But if you don't engage in the process, you will not have anybody up there fighting for your rights.
And so it's very, very important in this season as well as any other season, not only to become involved, but to also support those that are already involved. And you think that if we were able to do that, that we'll be able to move further.
And the truth of the matter is this, Dr. Haney, you're not going to always get to vote somebody in that you want. You may vote and they may lose. I lost my first 3 elections.
But you eventually made it through.
Because I didn't give up.
Okay, and so what we're going to do, we're going to take our second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
Know how the process works, which is you got to have somebody there.
You got to.
If you don't, you get left out.
That's what Brenda said all the time.
Yeah.
She say that all the time, that somebody's got to be there.
Joe Armstrong uses this phrase, you may have heard before. He said, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu.
You be at the table on the menu. That's right.
On the menu.
At the table.
Okay. Yeah. And so we got 10 minutes. This is our last 10 minutes here. And so now, anything special you want to?
I was just he mentioned about the bill, the decriminalization of for small amounts of marijuana possession.
Okay.
Talk about that.
Folks don't realize how important it is, because a small amount, ½ ounce or less, could be granules, could be seeds, but your third arrest was going to be a felony. College students were losing their scholarships. And then you're putting folks in, so you're taking a kid who's not a hardened criminal, you put him in prison. And
make him a,
what is he going to come out like?
That's right, absolutely.
Okay, well, so whatever y'all want to talk about now.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I would like I said,
you want to talk about that,
Yeah,
Representative?
Sure.
The impact that it has in the community in terms
Because
of some of the sentences.
Sentencing was not fair.
Yeah, well, let's talk about talk about how the fairness of
possession was a higher penalized crime than cocaine possession.
Well, that's what we'll do. We'll talk about the process of sentencing, and then we'll let you do it from however you want to do it. Okay? It's 10 minutes, and we'll start off with you and you, Representative Love. Thank you and welcome to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker and Representative Love in reference to the criminal justice system in the state of Tennessee. Representative Love, I think you mentioned earlier that you've been involved in some of the more important decisions dealing with sentencing in the state of Tennessee. Why don't you talk about that from your perspective and the importance of how sentencing can impact the life of an individual.
Well, just this past session, I was able to help get a bill passed that would take, again, the felony penalty off of a possession of small amount of marijuana, ½ ounce or less. Also, I was able to get legislation passed that would increase the value of property stolen to be expunged off your record. The amount stopped at around $900. The governor was going to increase the amount to $2,500 for an E-class felony, but there was no provision to have that amount also expunged. So one of the bills I had passed was to increase E-class felony expungements to $2,500 because the bill had not been changed since 1989. So we were going up on 1989 standards in 2016. The value of things has increased. So we didn't want people to have to be penalized when they get out of prison, right? And not have those records expunged. Secondly, persons were getting arrested and were having their cases dismissed because maybe mistaken identity or something else happened. But those arrest records were staying on their backgrounds. So you had folks who were not found guilty of anything who were still having these arrest records on their background. We were able to put a provision in which would now require our general sessions judges to ask you on the spot if your case is dismissed, if you want to have your record expunged right there. Last year we discovered that about 128,000 people in Nashville alone still had arrest records going back 10 years.
And without any, and that arrest record would have some impact upon them whenever they went out to get a job or whatever.
Because you apply for a job or a home loan and you're not someone who has served time in jail, so you're not thinking you have an arrest record. So when asked if there's anything in your background, you say, well, no, of course not. Then they run a background check and see this arrest record. They say, well, hold on. You were arrested back in 2012. Yeah, but that case was dismissed. Well, right here it says it's still in the books. So we want to allow folks to have the chance to keep on with their life without these arrest records being on the background. And
you know, Pastor, when we talk about the criminal justice system in Tennessee, I think that for a long time, you've talked about recidivism, you know, about how people would go and serve. Let's mention that too, because I think that's very, very important.
Well, you know, when you're talking about the recidivism rate, a lot of times in those situations, over 50% of the people that reoffend or that are reincarcerated, let me put it like that, are going back on technical violations. The majority of them go back on technical violations. You know, they may not have gotten a job, or they may have moved without notifying their parole officer or something like that. You know, technical violation, they have to go back in the system, and they have to meet the board again and go through that whole process all over again. So, but the signal that's being sent is that those people that are going back, that the majority of those people are going back, they're going back with new crimes, and they're not. You know, some of them do go back with new crimes, but the majority of the people that do go back into the prison system, they go back on technical violations. You know, and that's something else that needs to be looked at. You know, people need to understand. In other words, they need to understand that. Another thing I would like to see in terms of some legislation that could be introduced and possibly passed is that, you know, when an individual has been charged with a crime, you know, committed a crime. And let me say this: when I got charged with my crimes and when I committed my crime, got charged with my crime, went through the judicial system and was incarcerated, I was guilty. I did it. You know what I'm saying? And no doubt about it, I did it. But now here it is. I'm coming up on August 24th of this year. I'm coming up on 30 years. You know, crime free. You know, crime free, drug free, and all of that. You know, I don't even smoke cigarettes. You know, and it should be something that says, you know, why do I still have to have a criminal record when for the past 30 years, you know, I've been a productive citizen?
There's no way to have that taken off your record.
Absolutely. You know, unless you can go through a process, a clemency process would be an option right there, and in hopes that the governor, you know, would do that. And that's something I plan to do, not under this governor here, but I do plan to pursue that.
And so, Representative Love, when you look at incarceration, I think that the president has done quite a bit in terms of trying to deal with overcrowded and et cetera, et cetera. What about the state of Tennessee? Do we need to do anything?
We do.
Let's talk about what we
do. And I would say we also need to take a page from the state of Virginia, where the governor just exonerated about 200,000 people to give them a chance to get their voting rights restored. There's an unfairness, as far as I'm concerned, when we still tax persons who are out of prison with sales tax, property tax, income tax, but we haven't restored their right to vote. I think that there needs to be a more simple process to getting voter rights restored. Like Pastor Walker saying, there ought to be an opportunity for him to have his record expunged. The problem is, every year we have to add a new felony to the list of things expunged, and so it's a process every year just to add that thing to it. And so I'd be more than happy to talk to Pastor Walker later on about how we might look at other crimes and also the time frame and which felonies we can't add to the list. I believe that there should be a place in our society where people who have demonstrated that they are rehabilitated and living a better life than the one that they lived prior to going to prison, that they should be encouraged again to do what is right. Otherwise, one would ask the question, you know, why should I continue to do what's right when you're going to still treat me like I'm a criminal, still treat me like I'm in prison? You're going to restrict where I can live, restrict where I can work, restrict my right to vote. Those things should not be consistent with the country that we live in, which talks about giving every one man, one vote, no taxation without representation. Those are fundamental principles on which this country was founded. We got to go back to, if we say we want to take our country back, let's take our country back to the place where we give folks the right to vote and don't penalize them because they're not homeowners. Go back to that place. We need to get to a place where even those who may be homeless should still be the right to vote because they're still engaged in the process of buying items and paying taxes on them. They still need representation. So we got to get beyond this place of restricting the right to vote. We should encourage more folks to engage in the process.
And I think that's been one of the activities that many southern state legislatures have been involved in, trying to reduce the number of individuals that are able to vote.
We restrict college students in Tennessee who don't have a Tennessee identification, a Tennessee driver's license. They can't vote in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Even if you have a driver's license from the state in
of
which you
Tennessee.
live, let's say you live in Michigan. If you have a driver's license from Michigan and you're enrolled in MTSU, Vanderbilt, Tennessee State, Belmont, wherever, you can't vote unless you have a Tennessee driver's license.
And a large number of folks, I would imagine, will be faced with that in the upcoming election.
Sure.
Is that right?
And so what we're saying really is we don't think that your identification from your home state that's part of the United States is good enough for us here to say that is who you are.
Well, I think that that has been really something to, reduce the number of people who, that seems to be something that...
voter suppression is what we call it.
Something that the state of Tennessee has been involved in. I hate to say it like that, and especially hate to say it to you, but it does appear to be that that's one of the things that the legislature seems to be more interested in, and then getting folks to come out and participate. It's more there's more interest to keep them from participating. Yeah. So, is that true of what you're doing up there?
Putting obstacles in the path of voting, for me, is un-American. All right. And the statement was made about it, said we want to reduce voter fraud. There have not been instances where college students in high numbers have illegally voted. It's just that the vote of college students oftentimes favors one party over another one. And so those who in power chose to restrict the right of college students to vote.
And so in a real sense, we do need a lot of reform in terms of suffrage and voting and et cetera in the state of Tennessee. And do you think that the current situation is that there are many people that are interested in any kind of electoral reform?
No. They're more concerned with, again, restricting voter access. I would applaud efforts to allow, I think, we have such great technology. Why can't I apply to vote the day of the election? You know, why can't I, with the way technology is, you ought to be able to have a computer system that would show you that I've registered right now and I can vote right now and that I'm not registered in 2 other places. Because once if I register today and go and vote today, then I can't go and register and vote in another location. Why shouldn't I be able to allow to register the same day?
Okay, very